The housing market at the moment is a bit of a shit show. Prices are at all-time highs, and this is mainly being driven by some of the lowest interest rates we have ever seen to date, and the demand is outpacing the supply. It's kind of hopeless, so I figured why not have a chat about the topic anyway. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Reese, and in today's video, I wanted to talk specifically about the characteristics and features that I am looking for in a property that could potentially be my forever home. I'm currently in the market to make a purchase with my partner, and this is potentially going to be the type of property I purchase that I will never have to leave, something that hopefully I'll get to live out my days in and enjoy every moment of it. And the specific details for most people will differ because everyone has different wants and needs. The thing that you should take from this video and really try to understand is why I value these things within a property and how I rank them the way that I do. I use a 3-tier system to assess how I look at purchasing property, and I assess them in order. Tier 1 being the most important things that you can look for in a purchase. They are kind of needed as part of my criteria to even be considered as a property that I'm going to go for. Tier 2 are wants and desires, and not everything within needs to be met, but some of them definitely will need to be met. That's almost a compromise as part of the buying process. And tier 3 are definitely just wants and needs. Nothing within there really needs to be met. If they are part of the property, that's just an added bonus. So the first tier is based on 2 main things. It's based on the size of the land and the location of the land. If these 2 fundamental criteria are met, there is endless potential that you can do with a block of land in the right location. There is such a thing as having enough space, and I kind of set it at a minimum requirement, which I'll talk about in a moment, but there is such a thing as having enough, and as long as that criteria is met, there is so much you can do with that land. For me personally, the size of the land is one of the most important aspects to consider when looking at purchasing property. At a minimum, I am looking for 650 square meters of land. For my US viewers, that's about 7,000 square feet. That's how much at a minimum I am looking for to be able to do whatever I need to do on that block of land. The house might be good enough to live in forever and boast a lot of good features like having privacy and space in the backyard to raise kids in, whatever it may be. Or if it's just a block of land that I'm looking at, that should be more than enough to build something that could be classed as a forever home, which then carries over to the next tier 1 criteria, which is where this property is going to be located. This also plays a very important role in this decision. And this, for a lot of people, will be a compromise based on 3 factors. The first being the location needs to suit your needs. You might want to live close to family. You might want to live really far away from family. You might want to live close to where you work. That's the first factor. The second factor is, does it fit into your budget? The area that you're looking in, can you actually afford to purchase in one of these areas without leveraging yourself up to your neck? And third and finally, do you really want to live in this location? Is it a place that you could absolutely settle down, raise a family, and live out your days there if you were never given the opportunity to buy or purchase another property? And to use me as the example, where I work is actually on the other side of the city to where I want to live. Therefore, to make this compromise work, I'm going to hopefully need to meet the other 2 criteria that I'm looking for, being it needs to fall into my budget and it needs to be a place that I actually want to live. And luckily for me, where I am looking does fit into my budget, and it is a location that I would like to live. So once I am successful with purchasing a property wherever it may be within those spaces that I'm looking in, I will be happy with that compromise and hopefully won't have buyer's remorse and feel regretful once I actually transfer that large amount of money out of my bank account. Okay, so now moving on to tier 2, which has a bunch of mid-level criteria, such as the orientation of the block of land on the street, where it's actually placed on the street. What is the frontage of the property? Are there any significant trees or big trees on the property? Is there a lot of noise based on where it is within the suburb? And finally, how many bedrooms and bathrooms are actually on the property? The orientation of the block is absolutely something to consider. Where I live personally and where I'm looking to purchase, the sun rises in the east, it hovers over the north, and then it sets over the west, which means for me personally and ideally, I would want a north-facing backyard. This would allow me to keep my front yard pretty simple, something that I don't really think I would use very much, and it would allow me to focus on building a very healthy and luscious garden in the backyard, or a space that I can entertain people, raise kids in, and really enjoy it thoroughly. To me personally, that is important. Moving on, you could have a massive block, let's say 1,000 square meters. That is quite a large amount of land. If you only had a very small frontage, this would limit what you would be able to do with that land in terms of, or in the instance where you were going to build a property. If your frontage was tiny, you're going to definitely be constrained into what you can actually do with that space. So the frontage of a property, like I said when I went through the list just a moment ago, is a very important thing to consider as well. Okay, moving on to the next one, placement on the street. This has two main considerations to take into place. The first being the literal location on the street that the property is. There are two things within this as well. So the first one being corner houses. Personally, I have this fear that a car will come crashing into my house one day, and if it's on a corner, there are lots more vantage points for a car to gain access to smash through your fence into your house. This is a very common thing. I've seen it plenty all over the news, plenty of times. I'm sure I could pick up some photos and you'd be able to see it. So if you think about the location of where it's placed on the street, the same goes for if like your house is at the end of a street where the car's going to turn left or right, but your house is, if you kept going straight, that's where it's placed. That's another thing to consider as well. It's a minor thing, but it is something that depending on if you've got a checklist and you're looking for specific criteria, you're looking for what are the boxes that are being ticked when I'm looking at this property, what do I like about it? This is absolutely something to take into consideration. The other part of placement on the street is depending on whether you live on the high side or the low side. And what I mean by this is think about houses on a street. In some locations, especially where I live right now, the house that I'm sitting in right now, I am currently on the high side. When it rains, water runs from the property onto the street. When it rains really heavily, the houses on the low side, water runs from the street into their houses. This can be a bit of a disadvantage. It can be a bit of an issue as well, depending on how heavy the rainfall is. And especially if you live somewhere that has heavy rainfall, this is something to really consider. I've seen people's houses flood on my street, and in people I know's streets, it's literally a factor of where the rainfall is going to go. If a burst water main happens and where's the water going to go, generally it's going to flow in the path of least resistance, which is going to be on the low side of the street. If the road can't handle the water, people's houses are going to get wet and potentially in a way that's going to damage their property. Another thing to consider based on placement of the street. Okay, next up is noise. This is another one that people definitely don't consider when looking to purchase properties. It's something that comes later once they've purchased a property and realize that, oh no, I can't undo what I've done, and this is going to be an issue. So personally, I am the type of guy who will sit in the backyard, read a book, spend some time out there just relaxing, whatever it may be. I don't really want loud noises if I can avoid it. I know people who live near main roads who say that it's unbearable. I know people who live in front of bus stops who say it's unbearable. I know people who live near airports who say it's unbearable. These are things to take into consideration. And if you're not really familiar with the area and you're thinking about buying in the area, I highly recommend going there at nighttime, maybe even on a weekend, parking your car, rolling your windows down and sit there for a couple of hours. Maybe do this once or twice, just relax and sit in your car and chill and see just what it's like. Because if it's really noisy and it's something that's going to affect you, this is something to take into consideration. I actually have a friend who recently rented out his house and has had to do some modifications to the house because the actual windows were not soundproofed enough, where his tenants have recently replaced the windows. And it's absolutely fine. It's just funny how they didn't have that understanding how noisy it was going to be before moving in. And now they've moved in and it's affecting their ability to sleep. Don't want to get into the specifics, but fair enough. And they've made these improvements to the property and had to do a bit of work to make it bearable. I'll use the word bearable, which is a pretty interesting thing when you really think about it. If you go spend a whole bunch of money and the noise is going to be the thing that cripples you, it's something that can potentially be avoided. So noise is another thing to take into consideration. Next up is significant or large trees on the property. Again, this has two factors. Let's talk empty block of land with a big tree on it, or maybe a knocker-downer, a house that you're going to demolish with a big tree on it. Significant trees can't be removed easily. Let's just assume it's significant. There are rules depending on where you live, which will say if you can or can't easily remove the tree that is there. Let's assume that it's there and it's there to stay. If you're someone who's going to build a house and the placement of this tree is in a really bad spot, you're going to have a hard time building what you want. Maybe. This can definitely hinder your ability to build exactly what you want and should be taken into consideration. Another good example of this is when there's an established house with really large trees or significant trees on the property. roots are very, very invasive. I went to a property the other day and you could very clearly see the root path had gone under the house because they wanted to get into the pipes to basically suck up the water. That's what trees do. They grow to build out their root system to sustain the tree itself, but then they also go hunting for water. And where is there water? If there's water anywhere around your house, they're going to get into it and they're going to invade, crack concrete, damage foundations. I've seen it happen before. It is something to consider, and that's why I put it in my list. And finally, on my list for tier 2 is the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, and I didn't say it before, but the number of parking spaces or garage spaces. This is an important thing to understand. Again, that it's not something that will be identified when you're looking at the property to purchase in the now. This is a level of future proofing that is something to consider. Buying a property is expensive. Doing it multiple times within the span of a few years, maybe a few decades, is still going to be very expensive. The idea flowing here is that you want to have enough space that can future proof to maybe, let's say you're going to have 1 or 2 children. Can you sustain and live in that property with that number of people comfortably? Do you have enough privacy? Do you have access to the areas where everyone will be able to use them efficiently and effectively? Something to consider. Personally, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a double garage for a forever home is a minimum, and then you move up from there depending on what your plans are, how much money you have, and where you're looking to purchase. Throwing it out there, that is my minimum criteria for tier 2. Now, before I move on to tier 3, I just wanted to mention that what I'm talking about right now is completely subjective. These are my views and opinions on how I go into looking at purchasing a property based on my current plans, my future plans, and my wants and needs. For everyone else, it may be slightly different. You may weight or value some of the things I've been talking about very differently. So if there's anything I have missed or anything that you specifically disagree with, please drop me a comment down below. I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say. It's all perspective. Realistically, it's all education and it's all kind of a big discussion. So definitely drop me a comment if you have any input. I really appreciate it. While you're down there as well, if I could get you to tap that like and subscribe button, that would be a massive favor to me. I really do appreciate the support and it really does help the channel grow. Anyway, moving on to tier 3. The things that would fall into this tier include natural light. What is the age of the property? What is the style of the house? Has it got high ceilings? Have there been any improvements made to the property? Is there availability for parking in the street? And what is the style of the other houses in the area? Natural light and open floor plans are very desirable as they will usually make a house more energy efficient and in general are a nice thing to have. Open floor plans also create a space for activities, entertaining, and in general don't make a house feel so cooped up, cluttered, and closed off. Improvements to a property such as having a pool, maybe ducted air conditioning, an extra bathroom, maybe an extra toilet are going to add value to the property, and while the owners living in the house are living there, it's also going to make it more beneficial. Like they are benefits, they are perks, they are things that are generally going to increase the livability and enjoyment of being in that space. Age of a property is another thing to consider. If it's a really old property, it might not have as many power plugs as you need. Although it might be minor, it's still work that will need to be conducted. And on top of that as well, depending on how old it is, this is going to play into how much maintenance is required to upkeep the house. I threw high ceilings in there as well because this is definitely a really nice thing to have. In summer, it keeps the house a little bit cooler. It's something that definitely you notice when spaces look a bit more open and larger. It's something that is nice to have. Parking on the street is another one that people definitely don't consider. Would you be bothered if there were people parking in front of your house every day, or are you the type of person to entertain that would want people coming over and have the ability to park on your street? Depending on where you're looking, this will definitely play into it. I was looking at a property not that long ago that had 1 hour parking signs on it out the front, which I was like, great, no one's going to park in front of my house. And then I thought about it and went, what if I want to have people over? That's going to be a bit of an annoyance. It's going to be something that might bug them. It's something to definitely take into consideration. And lastly, another really important thing to consider is what is happening on the street. Are people knocking down the old style character homes to build boxy townhouses left, right, and center? Are people building 2-story houses next to the one you're looking at where they'll have, sure, they might have frosted windows overlooking your backyard, but they can always crank them open and see into your backyard. These are things that people don't take into consideration because it's not specifically tied to the house that you're looking at, but it's absolutely something to consider. Imagine if you built this amazing character home on your street and then every other house turned into a bit of a townhouse, boxy house that made with cheap materials. I'm not throwing any shame on those people that do build those types of houses. Personally, it's not something that I'm interested in doing, is it going to degrade the value of that property in the future? It's something to consider. It's quite easy to run the thought through your head, stand on the street, scan the area, and just add it to your checklist essentially when looking at purchasing a property. In my opinion, for the most part, someone who is planning to make a purchase on a property that is going to take them decades to repay, realistically based on what people are borrowing today, it's going to take decades to repay. Using everything I've just discussed as a checklist is something I would highly encourage you to do when looking at purchasing a property, because using this as a checklist will give you everything you need, or most of the important things, to tick off and actually see the suitability of the properties you're looking at based on your needs, your criteria, and your wants and desires. With that being said, I may have actually missed something, and if I have, please give me that insight. Drop me a comment down below. What do you value in a property when you're looking to purchase one that I haven't actually considered? I'd be really interested to hear from you. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope it was insightful, and I hope you learned something, or maybe I gave you something to think about when hunting for a property. And that's pretty much it. I'll leave you there. Have a good day, have a good week, and as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.